for, but what's the difference between a sanctuary city and a welcoming city?
That's a really good question. There can be a couple different differences. Some jurisdictions, to me, having a policy that simply expresses that a community wants to welcome immigrants is a good policy, and does not in itself mean that a jurisdiction is a sanctuary policy, for example, one that would be potentially subject to losing federal funding as a process that's now moving forward for certain law enforcement grants. The most important factor is that a sanctuary policy is one that deliberately and knowingly seeks to interfere, hinder, obstruct immigration enforcement by preventing cooperation, communication, exchange of information. It can take a lot of forms. It can be blocking ICE from access to the jail. It can be failing to comply with detainers that ICE issues to notify a law enforcement agency that they want to take custody of an offender that's at a jail or at a police lockup. Or not allowing local officers to communicate with ICE, to ask questions. But there are some jurisdictions that, out of fear of being targeted for consequences because of their illegal sanctuary policy, they've tried to change the name and say, oh, we're not a sanctuary, we're a welcoming. The latest one is a trust community. They use that as a way of not having to use the word sanctuary, which they know is politically radioactive. But it's not so much what you call the policy, it's what the effect is. And that's what the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security are going to be looking at when they are investigating jurisdictions that have sanctuary policies. And there are 10 of them now that have already been put on notice by the Department of Justice. This was a process that was started last year under the Obama administration at the behest of members of Congress. And there are 10 jurisdictions that have until June 30th to prove that they're complying with the law, or they're going to lose access to certain types of federal funding. One of them has already changed its policy in response to the federal government's move to impose consequences on them. That's Miami-Dade County in Florida is no longer a sanctuary jurisdiction. They're now fully cooperating with ICE. So that's evidence of how things are changing.
If I can just add one thing, there's a bit of misinformation, and that is that ICE officials are requiring, you sort of hear the argument that ICE officials are requiring or getting help from the Sheriff's Department or local law enforcement police officers in raids. That is not true. ICE officials conduct their own activities, and they let local law enforcement know that they will be conducting that activity to make sure that people are aware. But there is no requirement by ICE officials to have local law enforcement participate with them, and therefore there are no local resources being expended, and that becomes one of the major arguments when these politicians are saying, I don't want my law enforcement it costing me, my city, any money to have law enforcement work with ICE. They're not having to do that work. They're just keeping the communication flow open, and ICE is coming in and doing their job.
There was, putting these events together, you don't, you forget things. And one important group that I forgot to thank is the motorcycle clubs and the Bikers for Trump that came out tonight to protect everybody. Everybody's seen the videos of things that happened at Berkeley, and it's just great that we can be here together, and I'm glad they came. Listen, I promised that I would